The girl, Christy, was involved in a car accident with her sister because she wasn't paying attention while driving. As a result, she was thrown out of the car while her sister suffered burns all over her body due to the explosion. This left Christy with serious psychological problems, and 6 months later, her sister tragically passed away. At that funeral, Christy suddenly heard the sound of nails scratching through wood and saw her sister struggling in front of her. She blurted out that her sister was not dead, but those around her thought she was crazy and sent her to a rehabilitation hospital. However, Christy continued to be plagued by nightmares, so she followed her doctor's advice and drew the contents of all her dreams. 6 years later, just after she had finished painting a picture of a man, she received word that the priest who had cared for her during her childhood had died. She returns to the town, but strange things continue to happen. At that funeral, she meets her brother-in-law, his mother, and her niece. The girl whispers to her that she hears demonic voices. Christy decides to stay and investigate, but her brother-in-law and his mother are not welcoming to her and do not allow her to stay overnight. Later, she discovers that the girl has placed a time camera in her room to prove the presence of the demon, and the camera records the mysterious phenomenon of the closet door opening by itself. That night, Christy's visions become more frequent, in addition to seeing images of her sister locked in a coffin with a strange woman, and her brother-in-law's mother inexplicably collapsing. She thinks her sister may have actually been suffocated alive in the coffin. The images that appeared in her mind after all these years could have been her sister's distress signal. The next day, she began to investigate what happened that year and found that her brother-in-law and the nurse who was in charge of her sister's treatment during those 6 months had given her sister an overdose of medication that caused her sister's death. There was no one else but them to prove what had happened. She also finds out that her brother-in-law's mother died suddenly the night before, which the girl says was the work of the devil because he had a demonic mark on his neck. At this point, however, Christy is not quite in his right mind. He began to confuse dreams with reality. The girl who was clearly still in front of him suddenly disappeared, and the next moment, she was coming towards him with a knife. When he opened his eyes again, he realized it was just a dream. Then he found a passage through the house and saw the girl lying wounded on the floor with a scar on her neck. A short time later, her brother-in-law was attacked by an unidentified assailant. He said he attacked himself when Christy had a seizure and threatened to call the police. Then they hid in a small house by a lake where Christy saw a wooden box that had previously appeared in his dreams. She opens it and finds a love letter from his brother-in-law to a nurse revealing their affair and that they may have conspired to kill his sister. The strange woman who appeared in his dream may have been the nurse, but strangely enough, no one had seen her before when Christy asked around. The nurse was now unable to control the situation. Christy goes to the police and asks for an investigation, but no one believes her. She goes to dig up the grave in the middle of that night and sees only a highly decomposed body and no signs of struggle on the coffin. Christy begins to think she is overthinking things and goes to apologize to her brother-in-law that she opened the coffin. However, the police suddenly called and said that there were no burn marks on the body and that it was not his sister. Christy realizes the danger and flees. His brother-in-law stopped pretending and started chasing him. Christy hurriedly hid in the tunnel. His brother-in-law thought she couldn't escape and admitted that the body in the coffin was the nurse's, but he didn't know Christy had a gun on her. He was shot and killed just as it finished. Christy finds a hidden room with many of the bugs that have appeared in her visions before. She sees a grotesque figure inside, suddenly rushing towards him. Terrified, Christy closes the basement door. At that moment, she suddenly remembered her sister being locked in the basement. It turned out that this was the truth of what had happened. Her sister had been imprisoned for 6 long years. Realizing the truth, Christy was in a daze and was suddenly chased into the sink of the small house. Suddenly, a hand reaches out and pulls him into the water. At this point, Christy's delirious sister recognizes the necklace and knows that the person in front of her is her sister. Finally, after much deliberation, Christy understands that 6 years ago, her sister was burned and disfigured, and her brother-in-law and mother-in-law looked down on her. Her brother-in-law even had an affair with a nurse and tried to kill her sister with an overdose, which resulted in the nurse being killed by her sister. They were afraid that the truth would come out, so they put the nurse in a coffin as a way to tell the public that her sister was dead and kept her in the basement. But because she misses her daughter, she sneaks into her daughter's room in the middle of the night and is mistaken for a demon. Her daughter spends the day holding a knife at her and her sister eventually tries to kill his brother-in-law and mother-in-law. After realizing the truth, Christy is heartbroken. Unexpectedly, a knife suddenly stabbed her sister from behind. It turned out to be the girl, who thought she had finally killed the demon to protect her family. But when she saw her sister slowly sinking into the water, decided not to tell the girl the truth.